Over the course of what remains of the Obama administration, you're not going to see the big banks broken up, and it's looking like over the next 4 or 8 years, depending on who becomes president, or regardless of who becomes president, you're probably not going to see it either. But that doesn't mean that there aren't incremental changes being made, regulations being proposed that are going to rein in a few of the more extreme abuses of the financial sector. And over the course of the past month within the Obama administration, through either the decisions of various departments or executive orders, we have seen a couple of those sorts of regulations. And we're going to list 3 here. All of them are positive in their own way. The first has to do with what happens when, concerning a bank, a financial organization, you feel that you've been abused in some way. A contract has been broken. You haven't been given what you bargained for. Previously, you might be surprised to find out it would be very difficult to actually bring the bank to court as a result of something called arbitration clauses. So many companies have begun to insert binding arbitration clauses into their contracts that prevent consumers from seeking redress via class action lawsuits. Under the new rule, which the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is going to put into effect, these clauses would be banned. And so previously, instead of being able to bring the company to court, you sign away that right and instead go to an independent third party to arbitrate your dispute.
Arbitration always much safer for the corporation, for the company than just because even if you lose, it's an either-or situation. And you know, if you ask an arbitration for $1.7 billion and they offer $8 million, they're going to pick $8 million.
Exactly.
You know, because whereas a class action lawsuit, you might get the big award.
Yeah. And so these are becoming more common in a lot of different industries, especially the financial sector. These will be banned under the new rule, which is good for the individual citizens or those involved in a class action lawsuit that will now be allowed to proceed. So next, we have to do with the incentives that those on Wall Street and the big banks have in terms of how they advise or in what way they advise their customers. So now the Labor Department has finalized a rule requiring investment advisors to follow a fiduciary rule when discussing investment strategies with their clients. Advisors now have to, in good faith, offer advice that is in the best interests of their clients. You might have believed, as naive people like me believed, that that was what they'd been doing the whole time, but of course they had not. Like in other industries, if you make the bulk of your money through fees and things of that sort, then pushing your customers towards the highest fee situations is what you're probably going to do. Even if in the long term it's not necessarily to the benefit of the bank that you work for. And in the short term, it's certainly not to the benefit of the client. If it simply helps you, you're still going to do it. Under this new rule, they're going to try to stop that from happening. And it's a good thing that they had the first one that we talked about, because if you felt like they were not following this rule in terms of how they advise you, previously you probably would have had to go through arbitration. So it's a good 1-2 punch there.
Can we see that graphic again?
Graphic 7.
No, that's what I'm looking for. Racist. You wouldn't do that for a white president. Just saying.
I got news for you.
Would you do that if Jake Tapper were president?
Would I do that? Yeah. I got news for you. Whenever the stories about banking and Wall Street, somebody throws up bank shot. I got news for you. But no, we wouldn't have, because Jake Tapper deserves better. Okay, not Obama though. Even though here we're giving him credit. And then finally, you've probably heard of these inversion deals, where corporations that are primarily U.S. corporations will buy out a foreign corporation and then do a little bit of paperwork magic so that now suddenly they are international organizations and thus can evade some U.S. taxes. That had been becoming increasingly common over the past few years. It even came up as an issue in the presidential campaign. And now we have something over the past month that is intended to deal with that. The Treasury Department has new anti-inversion rules that target the most lucrative part of those inversions, earnings stripping tactics, whereby the strategic use of debt and interest payments are used to transfer profits from a U.S.-based subsidiary to a foreign-based one. The idea being that then you can hide a significant portion of the money and thus not pay taxes on it. So this is good in that, one, it's going to stop some of the corporations from doing the inversions because they won't have as significant of a financial incentive to do so. And secondly, those who do, they will not be able to hide the money, and the government will get some more of those corporate taxes as a result of the deal.
These are good, right?
They're good.
They're good. I mean, this is the little things that matter, that you have the president on the right side, and obviously there are those who would argue that there's a righter side.
But oddly enough, to the left.
Oh no, definitely, yeah. That's what I mean, to the left. So I don't know. And you'd like to think that this is the kind of thing that if you're a Bernie Sanders supporter, that this is the kind of stuff that at least Hillary Clinton will continue in this direction. And there's obvious reason to fear that she won't. But I would also point out that the Obama administration raised a ton of money from Wall Street too.
As Hillary loves to point out.
Right. And so, as every candidate running for president does. And so,
soon even Trump might.
Right now, and then we have one that didn't, and that was the attractiveness of Bernie Sanders. But it doesn't mean that everybody is in the. It does mean that the others are all in the pocket of Wall Street to some extent. I guess the issue is, how far into the pocket are you? Are you all the way down in the pocket, or can you see out the flap?
Can you poke up occasionally?
Right.
Yes.
If you can poke up
How horrified should you be?
That's right.
If you're a current Bernie supporter, you're still supporting Bernie, you're probably pretty scared about that. If you're a Hillary Clinton supporter, up until a year ago, you used to be very scared about that, but now it doesn't seem to matter anymore.
Right. I mean, and of course, what it means is that, the frustrating, what I would hope is because, here's another thing we don't know. Presidential candidates have surprised us consistently, usually in ways that their supporters are disappointed in, because that's the nature of governing.
Yeah.
Or the nature of not necessarily the nature of governing, but the nature of how we end up governing in this country. It's just how it has worked, and that's frustrating. Maybe it doesn't have to work that way, but it's so. The frustrating part is we don't know what's going to happen with Hillary if she wins, if she beats Trump, and I consider the Democratic race, barring some stunning development, not reflected in voting, but an outside development.
Or a very unlikely voting development.
I think that's impossible.
It's not literally impossible. I've looked at the numbers. It's very unlikely.
Yeah, I think it is almost as unlikely. I mean, it's only slightly less so or more so than Trump not winning. And he's not running against anyone.
That's true.
So that's what I mean. Just realistically, at some point, but anyway, so the issue is she going to govern
like Obama?
Which she literally says. I mean, that's what she's running on, that she'll govern like Obama. But I think we have to concede, what Obama does that mean? Because, if she governs like the Obama of the first 4.5 years of his presidency, that's a bummer. If she governs
on most issues, at the very least.
Yeah, I think on most issues. I think it's a bummer, because that is change that is so incremental as to not change. If she governs like Obama, to me, in my assessment of the last 3 years, where to me there seemed to be a psychological shift of, okay, I got it. Even though it was apparent to everyone else that they're not interested in my olive branch, right? For 3 years, it's been apparent that he finally thought, I don't think they're interested in my olive branch.
It started with the executive orders.
It started with the executive orders and started presidenting, to use the word that George Bush never used.
Yeah.
I'm sure of it. If she continues in that vein, well, I don't think it is still incremental change. It is not the big sweeping change that many would be looking for, but it's a process. And Bernie Sanders changed the conversation that I think it is way more likely that we're closer to that process than we were 5 years ago.
Yeah, and look, the final thing I want to say about this, I think that we're should be very worried about the relationship that she'll continue to have with Wall Street in particular. There are other industries that we can get into that she has troubling ties to, like private prisons, pharmaceutical companies, stuff like that. But especially Wall Street. I mean, bear in mind that it can't be much closer than Obama. Not only did he get all the money, but he surrounded himself with people from Wall Street. And so will Hillary do that? Probably. But that's only as bad as it's been under Obama. Now, if you're worried about the economy totally crumbling apart under its own weight, if you think that these incremental changes aren't going to be enough, which I tend to, then this is not going to be enough. But at least we should acknowledge some positive moves.
And very quickly, we can't, you surround yourself with people from Wall Street, no question. Who are the people from Wall Street who you surrounded yourself with is also super relevant. Yeah. They're not all the same. There are some people who are determined not to have any regulation anywhere in pretty much any. And that's and that to me, that's a grave concern. I expect to be disappointed.
I expect to too. Almost no matter what happens now.
But I'd rather be disappointed than consistently shocked on a daily basis.
Or possibly had my job made illegal.